Hey guys, tonight we slip into the past, right into the grit and glare of the American Wild West. Imagine the first light of dawn breaking across an endless horizon, peach-colored sky stretching above, while dust curls up with every restless hoofbeat in the street. You're standing there, squinting, breathing in air that tastes of grit and horsehair, and you're about to realize something important. You probably won't survive this day. The Wild West looks romantic in dime novels and Hollywood films, but living it, that's another story altogether. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and what time it is right now. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. It's like building our own little campfire circle across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The day starts with noise. You think roosters are bad? Try a street full of horses whinnying, wagons creaking, boots clomping on rough wooden boardwalks. Sleep is already a luxury you don't get. You roll off a lumpy straw mattress in a boarding house that smells suspiciously like mold and yesterday's stew. Forget a soft pillow. Yours is basically a flour sack stuffed with something scratchy. And yes, there are fleas. Congratulations, you've already started your morning itchy breakfast. If you're lucky, it's beans reheated from last night, maybe a slab of bacon that's more fat than meat. Coffee is strong, bitter, and suspiciously thin, like the beans were used once already. No oat milk lattes here. This is survival fuel. And if you can't stomach it, well, good luck finding hydration that doesn't taste like rust or mud. The town itself feels alive, but not in a comforting way. Dust rolls like tumbleweed in your throat, and every face you meet measures you. Are you friend, foe, or just someone to overcharge at the general store? You notice how quickly reputations matter here. In a place with few official rules, your name is your currency. Step out of line once, and you'll be known for it. Step out of line twice, and you might be buried for it. One mainstream fact historians always point out: the Wild West wasn't actually as lawless as pop culture makes it seem. Towns had codes, ordinances, even curfews. But, and here's the kicker, enforcement was shaky at best. The sheriff might be across town, drunk in the saloon, or already bribed by the wealthiest rancher. Justice could move slower than molasses in winter, unless it was vigilante justice, and then it moved faster than you could say, "Wait, I can explain." But here's a quirk. Many towns actually fined you for firing a gun inside city limits. Yep, all those movies with cowboys blazing away down Main Street, totally illegal in a lot of real places. Didn't stop folks, of course. It just meant you either paid the fine, or you knew the sheriff well enough to forget about it. Historians still argue whether the average settler in the Wild West lived more in fear of gunfights or in fear of disease. One duel in town might kill one man, sure, but a cholera outbreak, that could wipe out half the settlement in a week. It's not the flashy part of the story, but it's the one that actually shaped lives day to day. So you trudge down the street thinking about work, or rather, survival tasks. Do you try to hold down a job hauling freight for pennies, or gamble on panning for gold out in the river? Do you rent a room tonight, or save the money for food? Even breakfast beans don't grow on trees. It's already clear you don't just exist here. Every decision feels like spinning a wheel where half the options are, oops, you died. Still, the sun keeps rising, and so do you. You brush dust off your clothes. It doesn't help much. You'll be filthy again in 5 minutes. Kids run barefoot past you. Women carry buckets from the well. Men argue over cattle prices. And a dog barks like it owns the whole town. Somewhere, a saloon piano is already banging out a tune, even though it's barely 9 a.m. And you realize, this is normal. Noisy, dirty, dangerous, uncomfortable, but normal. The kind of normal you'd need weeks to adjust to, and you don't have weeks. Remember, you probably won't make it through a single day, because ahead of you is a horse waiting, hungry, restless, and in desperate need of attention. You're about to learn that surviving the Wild West isn't about quick draws or gold strikes. It's about the thousand small, exhausting details that decide whether you end the day alive, injured, or wishing you'd stayed back east. You step out into the rising heat, and there it is. Your horse, tied to a post, stomping and flicking its tail like it already resents you. Welcome to your new best friend, worst enemy, and the main reason you smell like a barnyard before noon. Horses aren't just background scenery here. They're survival itself. Without one, you're not going anywhere faster than a mule cart, and every mile on foot is another mile where rattlesnakes, sunstroke, or just plain exhaustion can take you out. You approach cautiously, because horses are sensitive creatures, and this one has already picked up that you're a rookie. The smell hits you first: ripe manure, sweat, hay dust, and it's everywhere, inescapable. This is the perfume of the West, clinging to clothes, bedding, and even your food. Ever wonder why frontier towns looked dusty and grimy? Try piling dozens of horses, oxen, and mules into one main street, each leaving generous donations, then add heat. Voila. Ode to survival. Saddling up isn't romantic either. Tack is heavy, cracked from heat, and coated in yesterday's sweat. You try lifting the saddle, miss the right spot, and the horse gives you a look that says, "You'll regret that." And you do. The cinch strap pinches your fingers, and if you tie it wrong, you'll learn the hard way when you slide sideways, halfway down the street. Mainstream fact for you. Most families on the frontier owned more animals than people, because livestock were wealth, transportation, and power rolled into one. Without draft animals, homesteads couldn't plow fields or haul supplies. Horses weren't a luxury, they were your car, tractor, and sometimes your only chance at survival rolled into one hairy, unpredictable package. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some settlers slept in the same room as their horses during harsh winters. Not out of sentiment, but out of necessity. Horses gave off enough body heat to keep a shed or barn survivable when temperatures plunged. Imagine trying to sleep while your roommate chews hay loudly all night and occasionally kicks the wall. Cozy, right? Historians still argue whether the myth of the cowboy and his horse as inseparable partners is accurate or more of a Hollywood invention. Sure, a good rider bonded with their mount, but the average settler saw their horse more like we see a car. Expensive, vital, and guaranteed to break down at the worst possible moment. And breakdowns here don't mean a quick call to roadside assistance. A thrown shoe could leave you stranded, a twisted ankle could cost you days, and if your horse spooks at a snake and bolts, congratulations, you're stuck carrying your own saddle until your legs give out. Meanwhile, every moment you're around horses, you're also around manure. Piles of it, mountains even. Towns often shoveled it into pits or simply let it accumulate, which meant flies, disease, and that charming perfume wafting into your morning beans. Kids played in streets filled with it, and people just stepped carefully. Well, tried to. Let's just say boots were a necessity. You managed to lead your horse toward the trough, where it drinks greedily, splashing water everywhere. The water is brownish, warm, with a floating bug or two. You wonder if you're next in line to drink from it. Spoiler, you are, unless you find a cleaner source. And even then, clean is a relative term. Your horse, refreshed, decides to test you by refusing to budge. You tug, plead, maybe even curse under your breath, and the horse just stares. A veteran ranch hand might solve this with a sharp whistle or a firm nudge. You just learn that in the Wild West, even your transportation has an attitude problem. By midday, you're sweaty, sore, and a little humbler. Your clothes smell like the animal. Your boots are caked with evidence of its digestive system, and your hands are rubbed raw from rough rains. You start to understand why so many settlers' letters complained not about shootouts, but about the infernal horse that will not mind me. And just when you think you've got the hang of it, your horse suddenly shies at a passing wagon. You lurch forward, barely hanging on, while townsfolk laugh from the boardwalk. Yep, you're the entertainment today. The truth sets in. You don't just ride a horse here, you wrestle with one daily. And if you can't master it, survival gets a whole lot harder. Because tomorrow, or maybe even tonight, you'll need this beast to carry you across miles of rough land in search of something even harder to find. Water that won't make you sick. By now you're thirsty. Not, I could use a soda thirsty, but the kind where your tongue feels like sandpaper and every swallow is like dragging gravel down your throat. And here's the problem. In the Wild West, water isn't something you casually pour from the fridge. It's a gamble every single time. You wander toward the town well, where a couple of women are already lined up with buckets, gossiping as they wait their turn. The crank squeals as a bucket rises, sloshing with water that looks, well, let's call it earthy. Clear? Not really. Cold? Maybe if you're lucky. But beggars can't be choosers. And right now, you're desperate. Mainstream fact. Water access defined settlement success. Many frontier towns were literally founded where wells could strike groundwater or where a river passed close enough. If the supply ran dry, people packed up and left, no matter how many buildings or saloons they'd built. Without water, nothing else mattered. You take a sip and instantly regret it. Metallic, muddy, with a suspicious aftertaste that makes you wonder how many cow hooves have trampled upstream. Locals shrug it off, they're used to it. You're already imagining your stomach staging a revolt by nightfall. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some settlers collected rainwater in barrels, but because barrels weren't always sealed properly, frogs often moved in. Yes, frog water was a thing. And in some households, people even believed the frogs kept it fresh. Imagine scooping a cup, finding a little amphibian wriggling around and just carrying on like it's no big deal. Refreshing, right? Historians still argue whether the biggest killer in these towns was contaminated water or just plain dehydration. Both were constant threats. Cholera outbreaks regularly swept through communities, spread by tainted wells, and people often wrote in diaries about burying multiple family members in the same week. On the flip side, travelers caught in desert stretches sometimes went days without finding any water at all, and when they finally stumbled on a muddy stream, they had no choice but to drink it, disease or no disease. You walk a little farther out of town and find a shallow river. At first glance it seems cleaner, sparkling in the sun, but then you spot the carcass of a dead cow half submerged upstream. Suddenly the well water doesn't seem so bad. You realize settlers constantly face this dilemma. Drink questionable water and risk sickness, or go without and risk worse. There's also the rationing problem. One bucket has to stretch for drinking, cooking, maybe even washing, if washing makes the cut at all. Spoiler, it usually doesn't. You remember your itchy flea bites and laugh grimly. So much for a quick scrub. Meanwhile, hauling water is exhausting. Each bucket weighs close to 40 pounds when full. Women and children often made multiple trips daily, sloshing down muddy paths, balancing heavy loads, praying not to spill. Your arms ache after one trip, and you suddenly admire the endurance it took just to keep a family hydrated. The townsfolk eye you as you sip cautiously. They can tell you're new, they can smell the hesitation. One older man chuckles and says, "Don't worry, son, the belly cramps usually pass after a week." Comforting, real comforting. And then there's the scarcity. Summer droughts turn streams into trickles and wells into dust holes. People scrape together water from cactus or dig shallow pits in riverbeds to coax out moisture. Some even drank blood from livestock during desperate stretches on the trail. You probably don't want to test that method. As the day heats up, the thirst gnaws at you again. You look at the bucket of warm, slightly murky water you've hauled, and you realize how fragile survival here is. You can go without breakfast, you can sleep on fleas, you can even lose a boot, but go a single day without water, and the West will win. So when your horse dips its nose in and gulps half your supply in one go, you don't stop it. You just watch, resigned, realizing that in this land, even your own survival takes second place to the animals that carry you. Tomorrow you'll ration better. Tonight, you'll just hope your stomach handles whatever microscopic roulette you just swallowed. By afternoon, the heat feels like it's baking you alive, and your parched throat suggests maybe it's time for a different kind of refreshment. So, you wander toward the loudest building in town, the saloon. Even before you reach the swinging doors, you hear piano keys being hammered in a tune that can only charitably be called music, laughter spilling into the street, and the occasional crash of a chair against a wall. Welcome to the West's version of Starbucks, except instead of espresso and Wi-Fi, you're getting whiskey and poker tables. The doors creak open, and the smell hits you. Smoke thick enough to sting your eyes, sweat soaked into wood and liquor that was never anywhere near a proper distillery. Men lean at the bar with slouched hats. Women in bright dresses weave between tables, and the floor feels sticky under your boots. You've officially stepped into the beating social heart of the town. Mainstream fact, saloons weren't just bars. They were community centers, business offices, and sometimes even courthouses when disputes spilled over. Miners got their mail there, cattlemen sealed deals there, and politicians made speeches on the same floor where brawls broke out the night before. You edge toward the bar and order a drink. The bartender pours you a shot of something amber that smells vaguely like kerosene. Spoiler, it's probably watered-down whiskey mixed with whatever cheap flavorings they had handy. Some was even made with tobacco juice or rattlesnake heads left to infuse for extra kick. Quirky, sure, but also stomach-churning. You sip anyway, because hydration and courage come in many forms. Historians still argue whether saloons fueled more violence or more cooperation. On one hand, tempers flared fast, and gambling debts often ended with someone storming into the street for a duel. On the other hand, deals struck over beer-built railroads, cattle empires, and fortunes that shaped the West. The saloon was both danger and opportunity wrapped in one smoky package. At a nearby table, a card game is in full swing. Coins clink, tempers simmer, and you notice one man's sleeve looks suspiciously bulky. Cheating? Probably. The stakes aren't just money here, they're reputation. Get caught swindling, and best case you're tossed into the street. Worst case you're carried out, feet first. And it isn't just men at the tables. Soiled doves, as they were delicately called, worked the saloon scene too, earning wages through song, dance, or other companionship. For some it was survival. For others, the only available job in a town that didn't exactly hire accountants. These women lived hard lives, often facing stigma, danger, and little protection. Yet without them, many saloons wouldn't have kept their doors open. You finish your questionable drink just as a brawl breaks out. Two men tumble across the floor, fists flying, while chairs scatter and onlookers cheer like it's free entertainment, which it is. You duck instinctively, realizing how easy it would be to end up with a stray bottle to the head. Some towns even had rules requiring saloons to close at midnight or ban Sunday drinking, though enforcement was laughable. What's a sheriff to do? Arrest the entire town? People worked sunup to sundown, and the saloon was their release valve, whether for a pint or a poker hand. And here's the thing. For all its rowdiness, this place keeps you alive in another way. You learn news here. You find work here. Maybe you get a hot meal. Stew that tastes like it's been simmering since last Christmas. But at least it's warm. You start to see why so many folks spent their evenings in smoky haze. Without it, frontier life would feel even lonelier. As night creeps closer, you stumble out, ears ringing from piano keys, shirt clinging with smoke, and head spinning a little from the whiskey. Behind you, the saloon doors swing shut, muffling the chaos inside. Ahead lies the darker reality of survival, the kind no piano tune can soften. Out here, when you get sick or hurt, the real gamble begins. The morning's dust and the saloon's smoke are still clinging to your throat, when a sharp ache in your leg reminds you of another truth. Out here, you don't have urgent care, you don't have Tylenol, and you certainly don't have insurance. You've got whatever passes for a doctor, and that can be anything from a retired Civil War surgeon to a traveling salesman with a wagon full of miracle tonics. Welcome to Healthcare Wild West Edition, where the cure is often scarier than the disease. You limp down the street toward a small shack with a crooked sign. Physician and surgeon. Inside, shelves sag with bottles of colored liquid, dusty bandages, and instruments that look like medieval torture tools. The doctor, if you can call him that, greets you warmly. His hands are steady, but his apron is stained in ways that do not inspire confidence. Mainstream fact: frontier medicine was rudimentary at best. Germ theory existed, but many rural doctors weren't fully convinced, or simply didn't have the resources to follow its principles. Washing hands, optional. Sterilizing instruments, rare. An operation often meant your neighbor holding you down while the doctor worked with the same saw he'd used yesterday. You explain the pain in your leg, and the doctor nods, reaching for a jar of ointment that smells like turpentine. He assures you it'll draw out the bad humors. You hesitate, but then again, what's your alternative? And here comes the quirky tidbit: patent medicines. Brightly labeled bottles promised to cure everything from headaches to heartbreak. Most were just alcohol, opium, or both. Some folks got addicted without realizing it. Imagine chasing a cough syrup that leaves you tipsy and wired at the same time, then wondering why you can't stop drinking it. Not exactly FDA approved. Historians still argue whether frontier medicine saved more lives than it cost. Sure, doctors stitched wounds, set bones, and delivered babies. But without proper hygiene, infections often killed patients who might have survived the original injury. It was a toss-up: risk the doctor and maybe live, or avoid him and definitely suffer. The doctor eyes your leg, shrugs, and suggests amputation if things don't improve. He says it so casually, like recommending a haircut. In this era, amputations were quick, brutal, and common. Soldiers carried those habits home after the Civil War, and frontier surgeons followed suit. Ether and chloroform existed, but supplies were scarce. More often, patients bit down on leather straps and prayed, "You're lucky, it's not that serious." He rubs in the pungent ointment, wraps your leg in a linen bandage, and sends you off with a bottle of his special tonic. You sniff it, definitely mostly whiskey. He advises 1 spoonful every hour. You suspect he means drink it until you don't care anymore. As you leave, you pass a mother carrying a feverish child. She looks tired, desperate, but there's little anyone can do. Child mortality was heartbreakingly common. Illnesses we now consider minor, measles, whooping cough, diarrhea, could take a child's life in days. Families grieved often, and graves for children dotted nearly every cemetery. You step back into the sun, oddly grateful that your worst complaint is just a sore leg. The tonic sloshes in your pocket as you walk, and you can't help but chuckle darkly. In this world, surviving sickness isn't about medicine. It's about luck, stamina, and maybe a spoonful of snake oil. Still, you tuck the bottle away, because when the fever hits, or the cough rattles your chest, you'll drink anything, believe anything, just to make it through another night. And if the doctor's cure doesn't kill you, well, maybe you'll live to regret it. You leave the doctor's shack with your leg wrapped and your tonic in hand, only to realize another pressing truth of frontier life. When nature calls, you don't have much choice in how or where you answer. The Wild West might have been full of wide open spaces, but when it comes to bathroom realities, it was a world of chamber pots, outhouses, and a level of filth you'd rather not think about while eating. Let's start with the boarding house you're staying in. Inside, tucked discreetly under the bed, is a chamber pot. It's porcelain if you're lucky, tin if you're not, and it's the only thing standing between you and a midnight stumble through rattlesnake country. You use it quietly, trying not to think about the smell, and in the morning you, or some very unfortunate housemaid, has to empty it into the street or a cesspit. Romantic? Not exactly. Step outside and you'll find the outhouse, a crooked shack, a rough bench with a hole cut through, and a buzzing swarm of flies that immediately investigate your arrival. Some towns dug deep pits, others didn't bother, and in summer the stench rolls for blocks. If you think you'll be left alone in peace, think again. The flimsy door doesn't lock, and more than one settler wrote about rattlesnakes coiled beneath the seat. Congratulations! You've just discovered a whole new meaning to holding it. Mainstream fact: most frontier towns had little to no sewage infrastructure. Waste was dumped into cesspools, alleys, or even nearby rivers. Diseases like dysentery, typhoid, and cholera spread fast, and people often couldn't connect their bathroom habits with their illnesses. Cleanliness wasn't cultural ignorance so much as survival triage. Water was too precious to waste on flushing or frequent bathing. Now for the quirky tidbit: toilet paper, as we know it, didn't become widely used until later in the 19th century. Out here, you might grab a corncob, a handful of grass, or pages from a Sears catalogue if you were lucky. Yes, that catalogue really did serve double duty, browsing future dreams of shiny stoves while sitting in a drafty shack. Practical, if not glamorous. Historians still argue whether hygiene improved at all during westward expansion, or actually got worse compared to urban centres back east. On the one hand, you had more space and cleaner air. On the other, close quarters in boom towns combined with non-existent sewage systems created some of the most unsanitary living conditions imaginable. Survival here wasn't about comfort. It was about how much filth your body could tolerate before breaking down. And then there's bathing, or rather, the lack of it. Water is scarce, soap is expensive, and privacy is rarer than gold. A full bath might happen once a week, if that, often in a shared tub of water. Families took turns, oldest first, youngest last. By the end, the water looked more like stew than something to cleanse with. You, as the newcomer, might be offered your turn last, if at all. No wonder people covered themselves in layers of clothes and cologne. You shuffle back into town and pass a public bathhouse. For a small fee, you can rent a tub and some hot water, maybe even a towel. It sounds tempting, until you learn that the same tub was used by dozens of people that day. You hesitate, wondering if you'll come out cleaner or just swap your flea bites for someone else's rash. By evening, you've accepted a grim fact. The West doesn't care about your comfort. You smell of horse, smoke, sweat, and now a hint of outhouse perfume that no amount of cologne could mask. Everyone else does too, so no one bats an eye. But as you try to rest on your straw mattress again, the buzzing of flies reminds you of that pit behind the house. Sleep won't come easy, not with the knowledge that sanitation here is less about flushing toilets and more about sheer willpower to endure. You may have survived your first full day of bathroom reality, but your stomach is already rumbling in protest. And out here, indigestion is just the start of your worries. You wake the next morning to the sound of wind rattling the shutters, and when you step outside, the world feels wrong. The air is gritty, the sky has turned a bruised yellow, and dust stings your eyes before you can even squint. Welcome to one of the Wild West's deadliest and least glamorous threats, the weather. Out here, there's no thermostat to adjust, no air conditioning to hum in the background, no central heating to ease you through the night. Nature runs the show, and you're just a reluctant extra in its drama. The dust storm hits before you can react. Wind howls through town, lifting grit into choking clouds. You grab a bandana, pressing it over your mouth, but it's like breathing through sandpaper. Visibility drops to just a few feet, and horses panic, stamping and rearing. Windows slam shut, doors creak on their hinges, and the sound of debris clattering down the street makes you wonder what might hit you next. You stumble inside, coughing, realizing how easily a storm like this can bury crops, clog wells, and ruin a week's worth of work in an afternoon. Mainstream fact. Settlers on the plains often faced blizzards, flash floods, tornadoes, and dust storms that could wipe out entire harvests. Weather wasn't just inconvenient, it was life or death. A late freeze might kill cattle, a drought might starve families. It wasn't unusual for whole communities to pack up and move when the climate turned against them. Quirky tidbit. Some towns actually hired people to ring bells or fire shots as tornado warnings. Without radar or forecasts, the only system was spotting a funnel cloud and yelling as loud as possible. Imagine relying on your half-drunk neighbor in the saloon to be your early warning system. Comforting, right? Historians still argue whether the harsh climate shaped the tough reputation of Western settlers, or whether that's a romantic myth layered over sheer desperation. Sure, endurance made people resilient, but letters and diaries often show just as much fear, despair and failure as rugged grit. Later, the storm passes, but the air remains thick, and your eyes burn from grit that's worked its way under your eyelids. You're still coughing dust when a neighbor mentions last winter's blizzard. He says people had to tie ropes from the house to the barn so they wouldn't get lost feeding animals in whiteout conditions. One wrong step, and you could vanish yards from your own door. Death by snowdrift, not exactly the glamorous cowboy ending. And then there's the summer heat. With no shade beyond a wide-brimmed hat, the sun beats down mercilessly. Sweat soaks your shirt, salt crusts your skin, and water becomes more precious by the hour. People passed out from heat stroke, and wagon trains sometimes lost travelers who simply collapsed under the relentless sun. When night finally falls, relief doesn't come easily. Winters mean frost creeping in through every crack in your cabin walls, breath misting as you lie under thin blankets. Fires need constant feeding, and fuel isn't always easy to find. You picture yourself stumbling out at midnight to gather wood in the snow, toes numb, hands stinging, just to make it until morning. By now, you're starting to understand. The Wild West isn't just about surviving guns or disease, it's about surviving the sky itself. Weather here is unpredictable, unkind, and entirely indifferent to your plans. You can outshoot a rival, outdrink a saloon brawler, maybe even outwit a crooked sheriff, but you can't outfight a dust storm. So you crawl into bed, boots dusty, throat raw, and realize something quietly terrifying. Tomorrow could bring more of the same, or something worse. Out here, the forecast is simple. Expect the unexpected, and prepare to suffer through it. Morning sunlight barely filters through the warped boards of your room when you hear something that makes your stomach tighten. The clinking, dragging sound of chains. You glance out onto the street and see a line of men shuffling under the watchful eyes of armed guards. These are prisoners being hauled to the county jail, or maybe just holding cells in the sheriff's office. Justice in the Wild West is a shaky concept, and you're about to learn that surviving the law could be just as tricky as surviving a dust storm. You step outside and nearly bump into the sheriff himself. He tips his hat, mutters something about keeping order, and keeps walking. His badge catches the sunlight, but instead of reassuring you, it reminds you that law enforcement here isn't a tidy system. It's often one man with a gun, trying to control a population that doesn't like being controlled. Mainstream fact. Sheriffs in frontier towns were usually elected and had far fewer deputies than they needed. They handled everything from arresting violent outlaws to breaking up drunken brawls, all while being woefully underpaid. Some towns didn't even have sheriffs, relying instead on vigilante committees or posses. And yes, sometimes those posses were more dangerous than the criminals they chased. Quirky tidbit. Some jails were literally just holes in the ground, or crude log shacks, and prisoners occasionally escaped by bribing guards with tobacco, whiskey, or even pies smuggled in by relatives. One famous outlaw supposedly sawed through his cell bars, using a string coated in sand and bacon grease. You don't even want to imagine how long that smelled. Historians still argue whether justice in the West leaned more toward fairness or raw intimidation. Was it about upholding community standards, or simply about whoever had the biggest gun dictating the rules? The surviving records show both: trials with juries and legal arguments on one hand, lynch mobs and summary executions on the other. The sheriff warns you, half joking, half serious, that strangers often end up suspects when trouble starts. Suddenly, you're imagining a drunken cowboy accusing you of cheating at cards, or someone deciding you look too much like the thief who stole their horse last week. Out here, a bad misunderstanding could land you behind bars, or worse, dangling from a rope. Even if you're lucky enough to avoid false accusations, the violence surrounding crime and punishment is hard to escape. Gallows sometimes stood in the middle of towns, both as a warning and a form of entertainment. People gathered for executions the way you might gather for a festival, selling lemonade and peanuts as the condemned man climbed the steps. The air would buzz with anticipation, not compassion. And don't forget the outlaws. Gangs roamed the roads, targeting stagecoaches, banks, and sometimes entire towns. When they swept through, ordinary folks had to hope they'd be spared or at least overlooked. Lawmen were often outgunned and sometimes outpaid. Some sheriffs secretly took bribes from the very men they were supposed to be catching. By the time you retreat into the saloon that afternoon, you feel uneasy. The laughter and clinking glasses don't drown out the truth. The law here is fragile, inconsistent, and often brutal. You sip a glass of tepid water, knowing that at any moment, the swinging doors could open to a posse chasing down a suspect. Or worse, looking at you as if you're the suspect. So you sit very still, keeping your hands visible, forcing a polite smile. In the Wild West, survival isn't just about dodging bullets or weather. It's about dodging suspicion. And that, in its own way, might be the hardest gamble of all. The sheriff's words linger in your ears long after he's gone. You slump back into your chair, but it creaks under your weight, reminding you of another uncomfortable truth. The food and water situation out here is even worse than the law. Your stomach grumbles, and when you head to the kitchen of the boarding house, you quickly realize the Wild West diet isn't exactly farm-to-table freshness. It's more like whatever didn't rot yet. Breakfast. A slab of salt pork that's so tough, you have to gnaw at it like an old boot, paired with biscuits that could double as masonry. Maybe some beans if you're lucky, simmered into a paste that sticks to your ribs and your teeth. And coffee, thick, black and suspiciously bitter, boiled until it tastes like scorched earth. You sip it anyway, because the alternative is falling asleep standing up. Mainstream fact: frontier diets often relied heavily on beans, cornmeal, bacon and bread made from coarse flour. Fresh fruits and vegetables were rare, especially in isolated towns, and scurvy wasn't just a sailor's disease. Settlers sometimes fell victim to it when their diets lacked vitamin C. Quirky tidbit: coffee grounds were often reused multiple times, sometimes stretched out by mixing them with dried peas, corn, or even ground up acorns. Imagine waking up to a steaming cup of acorn brew. Historians have found letters where people admitted the taste was so foul, they'd rather chew tobacco for breakfast. Historians still argue whether people exaggerated the roughness of frontier food for dramatic effect, or whether it really was that consistently awful. Some evidence shows ranchers ate surprisingly well when cattle and fresh produce were available, while others lived on near-starvation rations for weeks. Then there's water. You think it'll be refreshing, but the first sip nearly makes you gag. It's brackish, drawn from a shallow well, carrying the taste of minerals and something vaguely swampy. Boiling helps, but it doesn't remove the smell. And worse, wells could easily be contaminated, especially near livestock. Outbreaks of dysentery or cholera weren't uncommon. You eye your cup and wonder if you're drinking hydration or slow poison. Dinner isn't much better. Maybe stew if enough folks pitched in, but the meat could be questionable. Stringy rabbit, half-spoiled beef, or the occasional rattlesnake tossed in for protein. Some cowboys swore snake meat tasted like chicken. Others said it tasted like regret. And forget dessert unless you happen to know someone who traded with passing peddlers. A few sticks of rock candy or dried fruit might cost more than you earned in a week. Children treasured molasses so much they licked it off spoons, like it was liquid gold. Your stomach churns, not just from the food, but from the knowledge that famine lurked around the corner. Crops failed. Supply wagons didn't always arrive. Winters starved entire families. There's a reason hardtack, rock-like crackers, was such a staple. It didn't go bad. even if it broke more teeth than it filled bellies. You push away from the table, realizing that even the act of eating is a gamble. You could be chewing your way to survival, or to an illness that takes you down before you ever see a gunfight. Out here, hunger isn't dramatic. It's constant, nagging, and quietly dangerous. So you lie down, stomach half full, head buzzing from burnt coffee, and drift toward uneasy sleep. You thought the Wild West diet would make you tough. Instead, it just makes you queasy. Your uneasy sleep is shattered by a faint scratching, then a squeak. At first, you think it's just the wind in the rafters, but then something skitters across the floorboards. You bolt upright, eyes adjusting to the dim light, and spot it. A rat, bold as brass, darting toward the corner where your boots are. You kick at the floor and it vanishes into a crack, but the damage is already done. You're suddenly aware of every sound, every rustle. The Wild West wasn't just rough on people. It was paradise for pests. You try to lie back down, but now you're itching. Fleas, bedbugs, and lice thrived in cramped cabins, boarding houses, and bunkhouses. Sheets weren't washed often, and mattresses were usually stuffed with straw that turned into a bug resort after the first sweaty night. You scratch your arm and mutter under your breath. Forget about counting sheep. Tonight, you're counting bites. Mainstream fact. Vermin were a constant problem on the frontier. Rats spread disease and devoured stored grain. Fleas carried typhus, and bedbugs made sleep nearly impossible. With no real pest control beyond boiling water or burning bedding, people simply learned to live with it. Quirky tidbit. Some settlers sprinkled gunpowder or kerosene in their bedding to keep bugs away. Others swore by hanging skunk hides near their homes to deter rats. The logic was that if even people stayed away from the smell, rodents would too. You can imagine how delightful that made the living room smell. Historians still argue whether pest infestations were exaggerated in frontier diaries to highlight hardship, or if people just grew numb to them. Some letters mention sleepless nights plagued by bites, while others barely mention the problem at all, as if scratching through the night was simply too ordinary to record. Of course, pests weren't limited to your bed. In the kitchen, flour barrels might wriggle with weevils, and any meat left out too long attracted clouds of flies. You could try shooing them away, but without screens, it was a losing battle. Swat one and 3 more took its place. Then there were snakes and scorpions. Sleeping on the floor of a drafty cabin meant you might wake up to find one coiled in your blanket. Cowboys developed the habit of shaking out their boots every morning, not to keep them tidy, but to make sure nothing venomous had claimed them overnight. You check your own boots now and shudder. Even the barn isn't safe. Horses kicked at biting flies, cattle stamped at swarms of mosquitoes, and swine rooted around in muck that made a perfect breeding ground for everything unpleasant. A single infected bite could swell, fester, and turn life-threatening. In an era without antibiotics. You realize now that survival in the Wild West wasn't a cinematic duel under the sun. It was 1,000 tiny battles against creatures that refused to leave you alone. Out here, pests aren't just nuisances. They're hazards. They eat your food, disturb your sleep, and nibble away at your sanity. As the night stretches on, you pull the blanket over your head, hoping to block out the scratching and the buzzing. But deep down, you know the truth. You're not the top of the food chain in this room. You're just another meal ticket waiting to be claimed. Dawn comes, but it doesn't bring peace. You're jolted awake by the sound of boots thudding down the hall. Voices raised in sharp argument. Someone shouts about a missing horse. Another yells back about cheating at cards. And suddenly you realize what everyone meant when they said the real danger out here wasn't just the storms or the sickness. It was other people. The saloon doors swing open before noon, and the air is thick with tobacco smoke, spilled whiskey, and tension. Men crowd around poker tables, hats pulled low, hands resting suspiciously close to holsters. You try to slip into a corner, but you feel the eyes on you anyway. In the Wild West, strangers always carried the whiff of trouble, and you're practically glowing with it. Mainstream fact. Violence was a constant risk in frontier towns. Though not always the Hollywood shootouts we imagine, most deaths came from drunken brawls, arguments gone wrong, or ambushes. Guns were common, but so were knives, fists, and even broken bottles. Quirky tidbit. Some towns actually passed laws requiring visitors to check their guns with the sheriff when entering, like a Wild West version of a coat check. Of course, compliance was spotty, especially when half the townsfolk didn't trust the sheriff in the first place. Still, the thought of strolling up to a counter and saying, "Yes, hello, here's my revolver. Please keep it safe until after I'm done drinking," is more than a little surreal. Historians still argue whether the Wild West was truly as violent as its legend suggests. Some records show murder rates in boomtowns rivaled or even exceeded modern-day big cities, while other studies suggest much of the shootout culture was inflated by dime novels and newspapers hungry for sensational stories. But sitting here, you don't need statistics. You just need eyes. That man at the far table slams his fist down, and another pushes his chair back, hands twitching near his belt. The whole saloon freezes, breath held, until finally someone laughs, too loudly, and the moment passes, for now. Later, in the street, you witness another form of danger, sheer lawlessness. A group of cowhands rides through town, whooping and firing their pistols into the air. Horses rear, women scream, and shopkeepers scramble to shutter their doors. The sheriff appears, but whether he'll actually intervene or just wait it out is anyone's guess. Out here, sometimes justice just meant surviving until the trouble passed. You duck back inside, heart pounding. It's dawning on you that your survival isn't just about dodging disease or choking down spoiled food. It's about learning when to stay invisible. One wrong word, one accidental bump in a crowded saloon, and you could find yourself staring down the barrel of a revolver. And that romanticized idea of a fair fight, forget it. Most violence wasn't duels at high noon. It was ambushes in alleys, surprise shots in card games, or drunken accidents. The myth of honor was mostly that. A myth. So you keep your eyes down, your hands visible, and your voice quiet. It's not courage that keeps you alive here, it's caution. You realize with a sinking feeling that in the Wild West, the deadliest predators walk on two legs, and they're never more than a few feet away. You think you might finally be getting the hang of things, keeping your head down, sipping your gritty coffee, trying not to get stabbed in a saloon brawl. But then comes the problem you didn't account for, the sheer distance between everything. The Wild West is vast, and whether you're chasing work, fleeing trouble, or just trying to buy supplies, you have to travel. And out here, travel isn't glamorous, it's grueling. You climb onto a stagecoach, the driver cracking his whip as the horses lurch forward. Within minutes, you're bouncing so hard on the wooden bench that your teeth clack. Dust billows inside, coating your tongue until every word you try to speak sounds like sandpaper. You glance around at your fellow passengers, one sweating through his vest, another's already snoring loudly, and someone in the back looks suspiciously seasick, even though you're nowhere near an ocean. Mainstream fact, stagecoaches could travel about 60 to 70 miles a day, but only with constant horse changes and very little rest. Passengers endured cramped conditions, sweltering heat in summer, and freezing drafts in winter. Breakdowns, robberies, and overturned coaches were common. Quirky tidbit: stagecoach etiquette guides actually existed, reminding passengers not to shoot out the window for fun, not to hog the whiskey bottle, and not to complain too loudly about the food, or lack thereof. My personal favourite: if you must spit, step outside. Imagine sharing a jolting, 12-hour ride while someone ignores that rule. Historians still argue whether stagecoach journeys were more miserable than exciting. Some accounts describe them as thrilling adventures full of colourful characters, while others read like survival horror stories, sprained backs, broken bones, or week-long hunger when supplies ran short. You don't have much choice. If not a stagecoach, it's horseback. Long hours in the saddle that leave your thighs burning and your lower back screaming. Cowboys joked about saddle sores, but for you, it's no joke. After a few miles, you're shifting around desperately, wishing for a pillow or even a padded seat. No such luck. And if you're truly unlucky, you're on foot. Picture trudging across endless prairie, the sun blistering above, the horizon never getting closer. Every step kicks up dust, your boots rub blisters raw, and you realize the West doesn't care about your endurance. It will wear you down, mile by mile, until you're staggering instead of striding. Then there are the dangers along the road. Outlaws lying in wait behind rocks, stampeding bison crossing suddenly in front of wagons, flash floods turning dry riverbeds into roaring death traps. Travel wasn't just uncomfortable. It could be instantly fatal. When you finally stumble into the next town, legs wobbly, skin sunburned, throat parched, you think maybe you'll rest. But there's a cruel truth. Tomorrow you'll have to do it again. Because in the Wild West, nothing is close, everything is difficult, and simply getting from one place to another might be the hardest challenge of all. By now, you're sore, sunburned, and questioning every life choice that brought you here. You slump against a post outside the saloon, only to hear a loud buzzing near your ear. You swat miss, and then realize the next round of threats isn't even human. It's the wildlife. The West is crawling, slithering, and stampeding with creatures that don't care one bit about your survival. The first you meet is the rattlesnake. You nearly step on one as you cross a patch of scrub. The rattle shakes, your heart leaps into your throat, and you freeze in place. Out here, one bite without access to proper treatment could mean fever, swelling, and a painful death. Cowboys carried knives to cut open wounds or bottles of whiskey to treat bites. Whether those methods actually helped or just made things worse, historians still argue. Mainstream fact: rattlesnakes, scorpions, wolves, and even grizzly bears posed threats to settlers. While grizzlies were less common by the late 1800s, wolves harassed livestock, and snakes were constant companions in the brush. Encounters weren't guaranteed, but they were frequent enough to keep people wary. Quirky tidbit: prairie dogs were so abundant that some railroad workers claimed they had to shovel them off the tracks. Settlers sometimes used prairie dog burrows as makeshift wells, though the water collected there was often muddy and probably not something you'd want to drink unless you were desperate. Still, some did. Historians still argue whether frontier diaries exaggerated the menace of predators to make daily life seem more heroic, or whether the constant stories of bites, attacks, and infestations were just the plain truth of an unforgiving land. The buzzing you swatted earlier? That's a mosquito, just one, but soon it's joined by a swarm. With no bug spray, you're left slapping yourself silly as the welts rise. Malaria wasn't confined to the tropics. Outbreaks cropped up in swampy areas of the American frontier. You tug your collar tighter, but there's no escape. And then, of course, the big animals. You hear about stampeding cattle, entire herds thundering across the plains, flattening anything in their path. Cowboys risked their lives trying to turn the herds before they crushed wagons, fences, and sometimes each other. Outlaws you can dodge, maybe even talk down. But you can't reason with 2,000 terrified steers. Even the smaller animals carry risks. Coyotes snatch chickens, wild boars gore unlucky hunters. And skunks? Let's just say one spray could ruin your social life for weeks. Some settlers swore tomato juice worked as a cure. Others just burned their clothes and moved on. By the time the sun dips low, you realize the frontier is less like a sprawling paradise and more like a giant, living obstacle course. Every bush might hide fangs, every shadow might buzz with wings, and every step you take reminds you that in the Wild West, you're not on top of the food chain. You're just another animal trying to avoid becoming dinner. You stagger back into town at dusk, dusty and itchy, when the music drifts through the air. Fiddle strings, a piano jangling out of tune, the rhythmic stomp of boots on wooden floors. For a moment, you think salvation has arrived. Entertainment, a distraction, maybe even a little joy. But here's the catch. The Wild West's amusements are as risky as everything else. The saloon is alive with sound. Laughter rolls under the haze of smoke. Glasses clink, dice rattle across tabletops. You squeeze inside, greeted by a wave of heat and the sour tang of whiskey that's been watered down twice already. It feels like energy, like life, until you notice how quickly smiles shift into snarls over a lost hand of poker. Mainstream fact: gambling was central to Western towns. Poker, faro dice, and roulette made fortunes and destroyed them in a single night. Saloons doubled as gambling halls, social clubs, and sometimes even courthouses. Entertainment and danger walked hand in hand across those creaky floorboards. Quirky tidbit: some saloons had live entertainment in the form of piano players who were paid not in cash, but in free drinks. The result? A soundtrack that got sloppier and sloppier as the night went on. Imagine trying to relax while your pianist slams out the same off-key note for the 20th time because he can't see straight. Historians still argue whether saloons were truly the centers of community that popular lore describes, or whether they were more like powder kegs constantly on the verge of blowing. Some accounts describe friendly gatherings with singing and storytelling, while others emphasize the fights, shootings, and swindles that could break out at any moment. Even beyond gambling, amusements could carry risk. Traveling shows sometimes brought actors, magicians, or sharpshooters to small towns, dazzling audiences, but also stirring up pickpockets who worked the crowds. Dance halls promised lively nights, but women who worked there faced harassment and violence, while their partners sometimes ended the evening bleeding in an alley. And then, of course, there's alcohol. Whiskey so harsh it could peel paint. Beer that went flat before you finished half a mug. Drinking wasn't just common, it was expected. Decline a glass, and people started asking questions you didn't want to answer. Accept too many, and you might wake up broke, robbed, or worse. You sit at the edge of the room, watching a pair of men slap cards down with growing aggression. The piano bangs louder, the crowd leans closer, and you realize how thin the line is between laughter and violence. Here, amusement is never just harmless fun. It's a gamble in itself. So you sip carefully, laugh politely, and pray the pianist sobers up before your ears give out. Survival, you learn, isn't just about avoiding bullets. It's about making it through a party without becoming tomorrow's gossip. The night grows quiet at last, the piano keys falling silent, the saloon doors swinging gently in the evening breeze. You step out into the street and breathe in the cool air, but instead of peace, there's a creeping awareness. The Wild West is full of accidents waiting to happen. Out here, danger isn't always dramatic. It's often clumsy, sudden, and horribly ordinary. You wander past a stable and hear a scream. A ranch hand has just been kicked square in the chest by a startled horse. He's gasping, clutching at his ribs, and the men who rush to help know there's little they can do. Broken bones heal badly without proper care, and sometimes they don't heal at all. You can almost feel the ache in your own body just watching. Mainstream fact. Work accidents were a major cause of injury and death on the frontier. Farming tools, gun mishaps, horse accidents, wagon crashes, even falling trees took countless lives. Medical care was scarce, and a simple fracture or infected cut could end someone's future. Quirky tidbit. Some cowboys wore spurs so sharp they accidentally stabbed themselves or each other when climbing into bunks. One diary even mentions a cowboy who tripped, fell into a barrel of molasses, and nearly drowned before his friends hauled him out. Death by molasses is not the epic tale you'd want carved on a tombstone. Historians still argue whether frontier life was deadlier from deliberate violence or from these mundane mishaps. Guns made the headlines, but many scholars believe everyday accidents quietly claimed more lives than all the shootouts combined. As you keep walking, you notice a lantern swaying on a porch. Fire was another constant threat. One spilled kerosene lamp, one unattended stove, and entire rows of wooden buildings could vanish in flames. Families slept with buckets of sand nearby, knowing it might be the only thing standing between them and disaster. Even your own body is working against you. Slip on loose gravel, cut your hand on barbed wire, or trip while lugging a bucket of water, and suddenly you're vulnerable. Without stitches, without sterile bandages, without antibiotics, small wounds could spiral into sepsis. You think back to the rat scuttling in your room a few nights ago and shiver. The West didn't need duels at dawn to kill you. It just needed a rusty nail. By the time you crawl back into bed, every creak of the floor, every groan of the walls, every flicker of the lamp feels like a reminder. Out here, survival is fragile. You wouldn't last a day. Not really. And now, as your eyes grow heavy, it's time to soften the pace. The sounds of the town fade, replaced by the hush of a gentle wind through dry grass. The clamour of boots and saloons drifts away, leaving only the steady rhythm of your own breathing. The dangers of the West, with all their dust storms, rattlesnakes, and restless nights, dissolve like shadows at dawn. You picture the prairie stretching wide and calm beneath a sky full of stars, endless and steady. Your body, once tense from imagining kicks, bites, and bullets, begins to loosen. Muscles unclench, shoulders drop. Even the phantom itches from fleas and mosquitoes quiet down as your mind drifts. You no longer need to worry about broken lanterns or bitter coffee or the sheriff's suspicious glare. The story has carried you through the chaos, and now it sets you gently down in a place of rest. Each breath grows slower, smoother, almost like the steady rocking of a stagecoach, but without the jolts, without the dust, without the worry of outlaws. Just calm motion, steady and soothing. The Wild West fades into history, a blur of hardships you no longer have to endure. All that remains is quiet, safe, simple, quiet. And with that, you let yourself drift, surrendering to the soft pull of sleep, trusting that for once, the night will hold no danger, only rest.